Hello, welcome to Lecture 3A in our 4 weeks on water curriculum. Just as a reminder, my name is Rachel Whitaker and I teach environmental science at White Mountains Community College up in Berlin, New Hampshire. We are going to cover two main topics today. The first is the scientific process, and the second are the aspects of a good research question. So the scientific process. Many of you may have heard of the scientific method, and if you have, a lot of what I talk about here will sound familiar. For most scientific disciplines, it is actually more appropriate to call it the scientific process, since it is something that scientists cycle through, often multiple times, while conducting research or experimentation. The term method sort of implies that you start with step 1, work through to step 5, and then you're done. But that really isn't how science works. Before we talk about the scientific process, I'd like to introduce you to a few new terms. First is the term hypothesis. Many of you may be familiar with this as being defined as an educated guess. A more complete definition is a hypothesis is a possible answer to a question about how the world works. One important thing about a hypothesis is that it must be testable by means of scientific experimentation or research. Another word, control. A control is a check of a scientific experiment based on keeping all factors the same except for the one in question. And then lastly, the definition of the scientific process. This is a series of steps for understanding the natural world based on experimental testing of a hypothesis. And recall that a hypothesis is a possible mechanism for how the world functions. Alright, so the scientific process. The first step in the scientific process is to identify a problem. Second, you must propose a hypothesis. Third, make a prediction. Fourth, test the prediction with controls, or this is also the step where you would conduct research. 5, interpret the results and draw a conclusion. And then although I don't have this as a separate step, you must also communicate your results. This might be through writing a paper or producing a presentation or creating a website. And then remember, because it's a process, often you start all over again. As you work through this 4 weeks on water curriculum, you will be using the scientific process to answer a question regarding water in the state of New Hampshire. Now let's talk about what makes a good research question. As part of this 4 weeks on water curriculum, you are going to have to ask a research question and use data available online to help answer it. But before we talk about all that cool data processing, let's go over what makes a good research question. A research question must guide and center your research. It sounds easy, but research questions must be crafted and shaped and often don't come easy. Research questions can also shift and change slightly over time. Your question should be clear and focused and identify what it is that you want to learn. Typically, you have to figure out your topic before you identify your question, but in this case, we have already presented you with the topic, which is water. A research question would also typically guide the choice of data to be collected and analyzed. In this case, again for this activity, we will be using data that has already been collected by people at Plymouth State University, University of New Hampshire, and the United States Geological Survey, and others. But you must choose which data you will use to address your research question. Your research question should be something that you are interested in or care about. This part is particularly important because if you are conducting research, or in this case, analyzing data about something you don't really care about, then it is going to be hard to move forward on your project and create a product that you are proud of. As you are thinking about a potential research question, start with what interests you. Maybe it's a specific location, or a specific water body, or a specific type of water body, and then refine that question until it is workable. Please remember, the perfect research question does not exist. However, there are bad research questions. Bad research questions are often too general or too basic. An example of a bad research question for this project, based on the data available to us, would be to pick a data collection site, such as the Androscoggin River, and ask, what is the highest water level at this site in the year 2013? Although this may be an interesting piece of data, it will be very easy to figure out and doesn't really mean anything at the end of the day. Let me show you briefly how easy it would be to get a general answer to this question. I'm going to show you this quickly and also give you a quick insider's look into one of the databases you might use when you're doing your research. This database is called the Data Discovery Center, and it has a lot of data available on it. I'll be giving you a more detailed instruction on this database later, and other databases as well in future lectures, but for now, just watch as I answer the question I talked about just a minute ago. Okay, so quick sneak peek into the Data Discovery Center. First off, let's get to the home page. I've already entered the Data Discovery Center into my Google search bar. Once I do the search, I'm going to go down to the UNH website, and it brings us to the home page for the Data Discovery Center. Now, since I want to look at data, I'm going to go to the Data drop-down menu and go to Data Query, and it's going to bring me to a map that shows a lot of different data sets available. And since we want to look at stage, I'm going to go to the Lovotex data sites, and stage is just a fancy science word for water depth, so I'm going to highlight that. And then since I want to look at the Androscoggin River, which is right behind the college where I teach, I'm going to click on that circle. Notice I clicked on an orange circle since it's orange circles that represent the Lovotex site. And I'm going to look at the lower site on the Androscoggin. And then I'm going to go to Visualize. And it takes me to a new web page where I need to make sure that my stage is selected here on the left. And the stage is going to be in centimeters, which wouldn't be terribly useful for us. We would have to convert that to maybe feet or meters, depending on what the major question was in the bigger picture. And I'm going to highlight month so I can look at the data per month. And this is actually a really good example because it shows how some of the sites for Lovotex and for other data collection systems don't have complete data sets. So for example, I'm looking at the stage for the month of May, and if I click this left-hand arrow a couple of times, you see that the graph doesn't go anywhere, which means that right here, and it's telling us that was May 2nd, it's showing the date right down there when I highlight it. May 2nd, 2013 is the first data point for this site. So since I want to know the deepest of the water points for the Androscoggin in 2013, I'm just going to do a mental note here. Okay, so I'm up over 450 centimeters here, and I'm just going to cycle through the months. You can see in June that I'm still below 420. You can see actually in June there's a blip of no data, which continues into July. And then in July I'm just over 270. In August I'm under 340. In September, I'm just over 370. And then in October, and you can see November and December, there's something else wonky going on with the data. And that happens sometimes with data collection. So going back to May, we can see that the deepest of water depths in the Androscoggin was just over 450 centimeters in the year of 2013. At this time, please go to the link flashing on your screen to answer a few questions about what you learned in this lecture. Okay, let's do a quick recap about the guidelines for a good research question. Remember that the research question must be relevant. For the sake of this project, your research question will center on a water-related subject in New Hampshire. Your research question should also be manageable in terms of research and in terms of your own academic abilities. You don't want to have such a big, complex question that you won't be able to complete it in the time frame you have. You also don't want to ask a research question that we don't have access to the data that you would need to answer that question. And you'll learn more about that throughout the other video lectures. Your research question must be consistent with the requirements of the assignment. So you'll want to be looking at the assignment we've given you to make sure you aren't wasting time doing things that aren't required of you, and you definitely want to make sure that you are doing what is required of you. Your question must be clear and simple. That'll make the process easier. And remember, it must be interesting. If it's not interesting to you, then it might not be interesting to other people, or you'll find that you're frustrated when you're trying to go through the process of answering the question. Now, just to wrap up, a few things to be careful of when you're creating your research question. First, you don't want to be writing or creating a third grade science project. So although you want to answer some basic questions, you want to make sure that this is still college level work. And second, you also don't want to identify a question that can be answered in just a few factual statements, such as the example I gave you earlier in this lecture. A really good first step to coming up with your research question will be to explore the databases that I will be talking to you about in upcoming video lectures, such as the Data Discovery Center. This will help you become familiar with some of the data collection networks and what is actually available to you for data to use. You also might want to start with the basic question of what's going on here, and then do some exploratory research using those databases to find something a little more complex and that will interest you. This concludes the video lecture 3A for our 4 weeks on water curriculum. Please do not hesitate to contact me or the other professors associated with this curriculum.